Thank you for joining us on this episode of MSP 1337, a podcast dedicated to helping MSPs and their clients navigate cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a journey, but it doesn't mean you have to travel alone. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, and before we get started, I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, PCmatic, endpoint security built on a zero trust, default deny philosophy, allowing only trusted sources and blocking all the rest. Lightweight, simple to deploy, easy to manage, and compatible with all major antivirus products. Find out about PCmatic's unique lead sharing program for MSPs, backed by a primetime national TV campaign. Together, we bring advanced security solutions combined with more than sales enablement. We bring actual leads. Find out more about PCmatic by visiting pcmatic.com/MSP. Now on with the show. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of MSP 1337. This week, I'm joined by Rick Mischka of Short Arm Solutions. Welcome, Rick.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
Good. Hey, so this is a different episode from many of the episodes we've done by literally saying, I want someone who has a podcast. Welcome, everybody, to be on a podcast about cybersecurity. And, we can just go down the path by Rick Mischka of Short Arm Solutions. Welcome, and really dig deep into what I think.
How are you doing today?
Is what started us on this conversation. You had me on a different episode from many of the episodes we've done with your podcast. Literally saying, right back at the beginning, has a podcast about cybersecurity to be on. And you asked me like about 10, 12 questions. And we can just go down the path, everything from retro inception, what's your go-to, and really dig deep into what I think I said the game is what started us on this conversation. And you had me fast forward, and I kept thinking about as an episode with your podcast that you were doing right back at the beginning, kind of getting some of those answers that were coming out of. And you asked me like these 10, 12 questions. And I thought, around if I were to everything from retro gaming and have him sort of give me to what are you seeing? What are the trends that you're seeing? Because kind of this is like a science forward, and I kept thinking I'm asking on my time pass different question. We're talking about a different topic within cybersecurity, kind of getting every week answers that were coming out of the same questions to different people. And I thought, actually, it's more than a week. You're doing 2 a week, and have him sort of give me.
We're actually up to what are you 1 a day, what are Monday through Thursday
that you're seeing? Because kind of this is like I can barely do 1 a week, right? So I'm asking on my. I can respect different questions. So we're talking about a different.
Let's jump right into it. You and I came up
every week
in less than 5 minutes.
There's really 3 things that are coming out of this.
Actually, it's more than weekly, right? You're doing 2 a week.
Does the business drive?
We're actually up to 1 a day, Monday through Thursday.
Doing security within your business.
I can barely do 1 a week. So
business.
I can respect that.
Said that backwards.
So
are you going to let
let's jump right
what's happening in the
you and I came up with in less than 5 minutes.
Or
There's really 3 things that are coming out of
that path.
One of them is
then the second one
was
cybersecurity or what's happening
compliance
drive
versus
towards cybersecurity
best practices.
Or is the that was another one that's like
which one's the right one.
Then the second one was say it doesn't really matter
compliance
to start
versus
with, as long as you have an understanding of what that was
another
one
is.
Like,
and then
which
one's the right
one.
Quite simply,
people. It doesn't really matter what.
Quite honestly, takes those other two and says kind of
what
the
same
thing
is.
Every one,
and then the third one was just
quite simply
people participation of people.
Quite honestly, takes those other.
I'll just turn it over to you
for a minute.
Just
every
one
of these
is
defined
through some of like you've got these
participation of people
big in your head.
So I'll just turn it over.
And you were really
to
quick when you were talking about this.
Just like, talk 3 things.
Wow, that's
really
some of like
that's.
You got these.
I was thinking maybe you might take a while to get there,
but there's 3 things, and you were really quick when we were talking about this.
Like,
there's 3 things
because I think
there's a huge.
I was thinking maybe you might take a while to get there, but there's 3 things
in the industry right now that says
talk me through some of this because I think there's a.
So I'll just start with that question.
Misconception, I think, in the industry right now that says.
You tell me what you're seeing and what you think.
So I'll just start with that
question based on some of the ideas we talked about, and you tell me what you're seeing,
to knock off right away.
Might be a place to start.
The idea of, I think that's can I do a tough question to knock off right away? The almost the idea like of alert fatigued, right? We talked to our SOC team, and they're how can I do by alerts? Can I offer? I think there's so many almost like being alert fatigued. I do agree. We talked to our SOC team, and they're revolves around by alerts. People. I think there's so many paths, letting them make good decisions. I do agree that trusting that the people we put in cybersecurity world, people in charge of our cybersecurity practices, trusting that the people we put in cybersecurity world most of the time, in charge of our cybersecurity practices we should be having. But most of the time are good people, right? Most of the time. If not, then there's a different conversation. We try to hammer out, but we call it 5 questions in 9 minutes, but it always ends up being 10, 11 questions with follow-ups. We try to hammer out 5 questions we ask. We call it 5 questions in 9 minutes, but it always ends up being the big ones are share some insights with follow-ups, what you know, what you see in the cyber landscape, and the second one, big ones are share some insights is about why is cybersecurity what you know and what you see in the cyber landscape. And the second one, the trends I'm oftentimes seeing, trends that why is cybersecurity our network top concern talks about over and over again are the trends I'm seeing, the trends that what do I need to do to get the best people? What do I need to do to make sure they stay? What do I need to do to make sure that they're empowered? The people, right? And what do I need to do to can I give the best people? What do I need to do to make sure they stay? What do I need to do to make sure that they're empowered? And then that leads down the path. And right there, what tools can I give them to make their job? How do I easier, faster, smarter?
Sure.
And then that leads down the posture right there to, and does it need to start with compliance? How do I get does it need to start with best practices? I really liked how you put posture. How you put it in context with that, no matter where you need to start with best practices. I really liked how you put that's something. How you put it in context. People are butting heads no matter where you start. Compliance comes first, but I think great. I think that's something. Practices, or if we start with best practices, are butting heads over compliance. But really, what's the end goal? The end goal is for us all to go to best practices, or knowing that we're not always here, those will drive compliance.
And really, what's the end goal? The end goal is for us all where we're not going to be able to stay in business because the security and knowing that we don't want to put ourselves in a position where there's 2 things that come to mind on that. One is stay in business because I think it's Microsoft was just I don't know if it came directly from
there's 2 things that come to mind on that.
They were talking about basically loosening up the Microsoft was just I don't know if it came directly from Microsoft as the source, but they were talking about to drive basically loosening up the range users and groups 365 and allow more participation, more of the consumer in that security process, because when your users I come in and do it all for you, it's all based on the idea that I'm making these decisions in that security process, because when even though I come in and do it all for you, it's all based on the idea that I'm making these decisions for your best interest. You know more than I do, and it's like, no, I don't think it's a valid argument anymore if we're supposed to be saying everybody has to participate. Security, so therefore, and then on the other side, you know more than I do, and it's like I don't think it's a valid argument anymore if we're supposed to be everybody has to participate. Going through career, and then on the other side of this extreme, new job opportunities. Maybe we're talking about all of the and people out FR there Secure right now is doing career changes. There's CISP certification course, maybe like a boot camp job opportunity. I think it's over the next FR Secure right now is doing class. They had 5,000 people sign up for this like a boot camp. And the question got it's over the next of those 5,000 free to take the class. How many will they had 5,000 people sign up for this class, the exam? And the question got and the response of those 5,000 people. How many will finish the class and take the certificate? That's not working with very good. I mean, the response would not have like a private school, a prestigious private school would not do very well. That's not working with very good. I mean, like we would not have maybe a private school, a prestigious private school would not do very well if they had 5,000. It's not an easy road that we're on right now. Of those 5,000, maybe 100 will graduate. Just going back to the people part. Or even frameworks. It's not an easy road that we're on right now. Okay, let's use CIS top 20. And if we follow their linear model, people part, or even frameworks, this comes up all the time. Security training, that kind of CIS top. That doesn't show up. And if we follow their linear model, 17. Like people part. If we're following this linearly, like security training, I would argue that that doesn't show up until like I think it's control 17 in the whole stack. If we're following this linearly, on the compliance side of things, let's go look at. I would argue that that's almost how many frameworks focus on control in the whole stack versus on the compliance side of things. I think most focus on how many frameworks which is what makes this kind of convoluted is versus what does compliance I think most focus on the best practices, which is what makes this kind of convoluted is what does compliance end up sort of just rambled there because I'm like, other than satisfying there's so many pieces to this equation. There's so many pieces to this equation that when we have conversations with our clients, when we have conversations with our clients, when we have conversations with our peers, and how do we set that mindset? How do we set that mindset? You're the most important part. You're the most important part of the cybersecurity not a framework, not security, not a framework. Not security best practices. I can't get you on board. I can't get you on board. The rest of this isn't going to work. The rest of this isn't going to work.
Unpacking that, you started off with O365 loosening their range, we're all a little happier about, but in the same sense, now did I set my O365 up correctly? And I think some of that, I truly believe some of that came from compliance. It came from the new CMMC model that is being developed for and put out in the wild for the federal government. There's a lot of things the model says you need to do to be in compliance if you have a government contract. O365 said, we can make that happen. We'll turn this on. We'll give this ability to you guys.
Right.
So, that's an application where a big company changed because they needed of a compliance or regulatory situation. But I've yet to see people at the top of any of the frameworks, the MITRE framework, the CMMC models, the old NIST models, you name it. They're in there. I'm curious to think maybe they just assume that people have to be a part of it, and so it wasn't added as a control. I just don't know. Talking about that boot camp all the time. There's a really good school in Colorado Springs that has boot camps. But they've done it a little differently. They've invited and do selection like a normal college would of people they feel are going to not only participate, but graduate and certify. But they get paid primarily from businesses who use those people that graduate as a recruiting tool.
Right.
And so it becomes a motivation for me to graduate from this. I actually am trying to get a job versus I'm taking this to get some CEs, or I'm taking this because my boss said I'm going to
get self-initiated is not. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do this just because.
Right.
It's funny. You talked about CMMC, and I think that's another one. That's creating some misunderstandings with regards to compliance and security. There's this misunderstanding in the sense that if I do CMMC, I'm now compliant federal government for a contract. And I think the exact words were you will be assessed based on the CMMC tiers that you've sort of self-applied for, right? Based on what we do, this is where we land. And so based on where we land, these are the CMMC controls that we've got to prove while we're assessed that we're golden. And what I've had so many conversations on is that didn't remove the necessity for all the controls that are assumed that are not being assessed by an assessor in this instance because they don't have time. Right. And so I think that's one of the things that's also changing is the assessing frameworks that are being used. There's a lot of people assumptions because we don't have time to check everything that says don't do this because it's you just want to get a contract. You need to do this because you want to protect the data integrity, confidentiality, and what most frameworks, I'd say all frameworks at the core have a focus of saying we're going to follow the CIA triad, right? Like paramount, and we get caught up in the weeds because bureaucracy and politics is around us. It says, HIPAA or CMMC. This is all about someone getting paid. That may be partially true, but the reality is those frameworks, those compliance models, sit down and look at them. There's nothing in it that says this is about me taking 20% more out of your taxes, right? And if you spend enough time, you will find that the frameworks that are out there, and the organizations that support them. And if you don't have any money, do these things.
Right.
And so I guess that's where I would shift the direction a little bit. You've had a lot of conversations. It's all been about people at the end of the day. No one wants to spend money on this. You've talked to vendors, you've talked to peers. There's been just a whole scattering, splatter, a plethora of variances in who you've talked to. Let's go down that path. Because I think that's important. Because I think that's start talking about, and maybe do it from two perspectives. And maybe do it from two perspectives. One is me in the workplace. Second one would be me as a consumer.
Yeah. Smattering. Is that smattering?
Yeah, that's where I take like 5 things that kind of fall in that category and just lump them together.
So I think that consumer. I would argue that the consumer has a more difficult time because they don't know what they don't know. It's almost a fake news. There's all these things blasting them. About do this, not that. Trying to make sure that they are depending on what the consumer is trying to consume. How to be more postured. I would argue that there's not a single consumer out there who's just using their personal laptop with MFA, right? Authentication. Because they haven't been told that's the right choice. They just get frustrated when some website says, we need to text you a code. So the consumer, I think, it needs to be looked at from a different perspective. I think consumer needs to be looked at. Are we talking about what they're doing for security? Are we talking about what they're trying to get into? So that I would pose that back to you. That's the way.
So what do you mean by trying to get into security?
So I mean, you and I are both in the security world.
Sure.
We do various things. And we're trying to get better at it. We're trying to learn at it, whether it's tools, whether it's schooling.
Sure.
But my wife doesn't give a crap. Cybersecurity expert. So is that the consumer we're trying to focus on, or we the consumers? You and I, the consumers.
But are we the same person in our personal lives as we are in our work lives? Because I would say that even on a good day, there are things that I will compromise on. Less and less so as we go forward, especially the Facebook and some of the Facebook and some of the other stuff happen. But I think that on the consumerism side, we are just as a target, regardless of what we might think about ourselves, in the sense that Grubhub, or some of these tools to make our lives more convenient. We're just as susceptible to put our information in whether we should or shouldn't, because it makes our lives easier, or it makes something more convenient. Like the different IoT with regards to like your Alexas and Googles, the different. I probably just fired some waiting for me to ask the next question. But that I think is where we on the work side have a bigger opportunity because I think about the first 10 years of my career, early 2000s, you configured an access point via there was no GUI interface. And security, I was impressed when I got the SSID because it was case sensitive to work when I go to connect my laptop. Hey, look at me, I'm on my laptop, I'm not physically plugged into a cable, and then my battery would die. But is that not what we've been inundated with for 20 plus years? The conveniences what technology is giving to us, and now we're layering consumer or not shift gears into that work side. All these complexities around being secure, which take away the benefits that were efficiency and convenience.
That's a great rabbit hole. That's a great rabbit hole to think about. We all love our apps. We all love the ease of being able to biometrically jump on my phone or on my device and open an app and have everything I need. And I personally think that we're inundated with. This company has been breached. This app has been breached. Your data is breached. Google tells me every day that my passwords are compromised, and I know they're not.
We're becoming desensitized.
Yes, and I think that's the toughest part when you circle it back to people. And what a lot of our colleagues are saying on the podcast is how can we resensitize? How can we educate without putting our thumb over them down and crushing them down and saying, just do this, because you're right. A lot of people are like, I've already lost my data. I don't care. What's the worst that can happen? And that's obviously the worst thing that could happen.
You're like, I don't know.
Yeah, right. We haven't figured that out yet. So that would be the curious conversation of instead of talking about how we can make everything how we can get our computer to be secure, how we can do all of these things that you and I do on a daily basis for the consumers, for our colleagues, the business side of the house of what we're working on. That's more important. Figuring out how can we not desensitize. I'll tell a story. I was helping a group talk about best practices to make sure that they were compliant for CMMC accreditation level. Level one is simply practice. It's just simply doing things the right way without a policy. Level 2 is policy. Level 2 is policy.
Right.
Level 5 is
It basically is a maturity model that represents this maturity model anyway.
Yeah, with some extra families or something.
Right, but the tiering model is essentially adopting the same set
documented and automated
versus manual ad hoc.
Yep. It's I would say it's NIST 2.0, right? It's a good level set. It's a good way to move forward, and it's like anything for the government.
Right, of course.
But so the story goes. We were talking about how we had tested defenses by sending out a spam email, a phishing attempt, that we wanted to see who was going to click on it, and right after that email came out, we had sent a confidential CUI invite for a training about it, which came up that you had to log in to see this email, this encrypted email. And after we did it, we looked at both emails, one being a phishing attempt, and one being a legitimate encrypted email from Microsoft, and they looked almost the same.
Oh wow!
So now, the only difference, ultimately, if you hovered over the link, you could tell the URL was the little one came directly from a Paragon employee, from an actual employee for a number of different people. The problem, the first hand that raised was like business guy. He's like, how will I know when it's real and not real? And will I get desensitized? That was his term. To best practices of not clicking in my password to be able to see this encrypted. At what point am I going to miss an actual conversation I need to be a part of? And we didn't have a response. Because looking at it side by side during the training, it took me and another cyber expert 30 seconds staring at the two to find the actual discrepancy. That's how close it was. And we were testing it. It was our own. And so I struggle with the sensitivity of it because if we desensitize those employees who aren't right, let's call those the true consumer. It's the CFO who's a high risk employee of my organization. He's the CFO. He writes the paychecks. He writes the checks. And if he gets desensitized and stops looking at stuff. Okay. He's not clicking on links. He's not going to accept getting fish, calendar invite. Yeah, he's not going to accept anything. And all of a sudden, he misses a huge opportunity for an M&A or a huge opportunity for a business sale that we need him to be a part of. did we just do justice to the business, or did we just so that kind of circles back to the conversation that who needs to drive it? Who needs to drive it? Driving business, cyber, or cyber driving the business?
Well, let's walk back. I think that's the crux of it right there, and that is we've been saying this a lot. Lately. How do you educate the unwilling? In fact, I go back to I think it was like the fifth or sixth episode that I did. I was on Bob Cope, and he said, you can't. You have to educate the unwilling. And he wasn't saying that they're unwilling in the conversation. But they're really at a point where you said that they've become desensitized to what it is they need to be trained on. This is the interesting part. This is the area where we probably have the most on our clients and on our clients and our peers. Why'd you click on it? Because it was when your mouse hovered over you somewhere else. Because I think we have we're like the horse going through Central Park with the blinders on. I know that I'm just supposed to keep following. I'm not supposed to look left. And we do that as soon as we get an email, especially when it's colorful, especially when it's colorful, right? Like if it's got good imagery. Outlook for years has been don't allow pictures from unrecognized addresses. So you brought up I would almost argue as an exception to the current rule. You had one that was difficult to decipher. But what we really have to do, at least right now, help them understand to discern the ones that are obviously fake, right? Fake. Like we did an exercise not too long ago. A buddy of mine was telling me about an exercise that he did, and it was for the Siberian orchestra Siberian something that was going to be had just been in Tampa. He decided to do this fishing campaign 2 weeks after they had left. It sends out for you and a significant plus one. This is all you get, and like sent this out, and it sent this out. 50% responded, and he goes, after they did the follow up on the campaign, they still had people go, well, when do I get my tickets? Like this is not real. This is not real. He goes, we used broken English. He's like, we had incomplete sentences. He's like, the only thing that was even close. He goes, since it was going to be at the Tampa Bay Rays, whatever it's called now. They used the old name, which it hasn't been for more than 5 years, and people still clicked on it. I think I use that example because we don't have to solve the most difficult problem. We just have to make it harder for the bad guys to get away with easy ones. Like the Amazon bank that says, or the bank that says, please reset your password. It's like, when has your bank ever emailed you to say that? No, ever. Right. Even if it was compromised, I'm pretty sure they're not emailing you to go, could you please give me your password? We want to see what's in the that we have of other compromised passwords. No, your dog's name plus a birth date, right? So I think that going down this rabbit hole, this comes back to like what you said. Well, does the business drive it? Like people drive it, like consumerism, consumerism. So this raises the question: what's the cost for education on the front end, versus what's the cost for say tools, services that at least reduce what's getting through? What can we do to choke off some of that? Like you said, like we were saying earlier, like O365, have like anti-spam or third-party products that help with catching phishing campaigns, those kind of things. There's a balancing act in there somewhere, and I think that's where I would. And maybe you've seen some of that with your episodes. Like if you ask me point blank, what do we do? I think we have to say I need to edge those around me, and not be so quick to say, I get it, it's complicated, just turn that off. Or like you were saying about Google. I think that's a pretty accurate statement when they say this password being compromised. They're not saying compromise your password being compromised. What they are saying is the word phrase that you're using in your password browser. They've seen it in a database. Right. doesn't have any correlation. And it could have been the username or the username or the password. Odds are if it's password compromised, so it has nothing to do with it. And I think it's just one more security tool that we're desensitized. We don't want to hear that. We don't want to hear that my password because everybody's password. So why am I going to put any effort in?
Right. I really like the thought of education. Having been in the education world for a long time. I truly believe that most companies are educating the other teams in some way, shape, or form. It's not standardized right for that company, which is most likely the right choice. But I think there's a step. So they go from education, and then they jump right into buying a product that's going to help.
Sure.
But what is it helping with? What is it helping with? The step they're missing is the risk assessment. Why do I need that product? Why did education not work? Who is at risk? I need to build that. Is it my CEO? She's just off on whatever she wants, doing whatever she wants to, clicking on everything. She just won't take the education, or is it that my CFO he has all of the education in the world, but he's still a high risk target. And I think people skip the step, and it's not a hard step. Let's put a risk on the person and say, okay, how many of these people are there, and can we continue education, or is there enough people we just know the business is going to have XYZ done, and cybersecurity says we can fix it with a tool. And so there's your cost analysis, that risk. That risk. People jump to, this tool will help us. It will save us on this many hours of time. And this is the cost analysis. They don't take in the why they're doing it. Why they're doing it. Factors internal, right? There's risk factors. There's risk factors. I'm going to go buy an endpoint solution. I need my endpoint. People are going to try and be a bad actor towards my endpoint. Sure. But who is at risk? And who needs us to turn up the dial? And so that's what I'm hearing. That's what I think is important.
And no one likes to say that. No one likes to say that. No one likes to say, let's do a risk assessment. Let's do a risk assessment.
Here we go again. But if I would ask this question.
I think this goes hand in hand with risk. Why do I need to do this? I mean, why? Because my employees are going to do it anyways. If we don't, we're going to miss out on business. Time to wait for it. There's so many things. It reminds me, and we see a lot of this. And we see a lot of this as far as logos go. The castle, the moat, and a drawbridge. It's like, well, they can still fire arrows. They can still swim through the water. Okay, we'll add alligators. And then we'll add sharks. It's like, well, what does it cost you? What does it cost you? What you have in moat, right? Like, I mean, right? Like, at some point, there's not enough money that you can continue or resources continue down this path. Continue to cascade security perimeter indefinitely because it has a significant cost to it. The balancing act with your risk assessment that you're talking about, identifying what are the things that we know we can do to make the change, and then in that same question are asking ourselves, is there a product or service that reduces, because that's it at the end of the day. We're not saying eliminate problem. Reduce the threat service, the probability. And I think if we do that well, we're going to start to see costs rise for the guys that want to do damage to us. And as their costs go up, profitability goes down. The opportunity becomes less and less inviting.
Yes. That is probably the most important reason that you would do anything, education risk or purchase or product. All of those should lead you to what your process is doing well and what it's not doing well. And fix your process. But understand the guy that's trying to he's just hit an automation. And the the tool that can help you the most, is the one that makes him have to go in, send an email manually. Right? I mean, I know that's super low level, but it's things like that. It's things like that.
Or the template doesn't work anymore. He's using cookie cutter templates, and they don't work anymore. And now he has to actually learn about your business to be successful, regardless of how many emails he sends.
Right. And that's the thing. You're never going to reduce the surface to zero. And you have to assume that there's going to be people behind your drawbridge door, into your actual castle. And that's a different conversation. That's about having the right people in the right place. You can identify that. Looking at your network traffic, behind your firewalls. Those are all things you're already beyond your edge. However, it's, if that's one in a million let through.
Right.
Because you've done a good risk assessment, because you've figured out what process is broken, because you've pissed off the bad actor in a million, he's going to go learn about your company. I think you're doing a good job. You're become pretty cyber resilient at that point. If you're making them have to work harder. Now, some people are going to say, well, if I'm making them have to work harder, it's going to be harder for me to detect. Maybe, but you've also stopped all the easy stuff, and
the hard stuff's coming either way.
Right.
Let's not downplay you might piss off the one. What's the probability that there aren't a whole bunch of them that are already? The agendas are not always driven by self-gain. This is an organized, lots of resources. It is truly organized crime. They pay taxes, cars, whatever. Yeah. As we are closing out here, what's one last thing you would share with the audience? I would suspect that some of your audience overlap on this episode anyway. So what would you say to both audiences?
I love the idea when I hear empower your people. It's what you have to do. But empower them with the right process. Empower them with what you think is going to be beneficial for them and for your company. I truly believe that drive cybersecurity. Whether you agree or disagree, I believe that your business is who's paying in the cybersecurity space. And don't disrupt business by being too secure. But make sure that you understand as somebody who sits kind of in that cybersecurity but also can see the business sales side. I know for a fact that without salespeople going out and selling, without the business creating revenue, I wouldn't have a job.
Right.
And so that's what I would just caution people is, don't let your mindset of what secure needs to look like disrupt your business if you can do it a different way.
So that was a very tactful way of saying we need to do another episode exclusively about how risk assessment drive those outcomes, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, wait. Foreshadowing. We'll get it done before the end of the year. So Rick, where can people find you?
You can check us out at LinkedIn. Short Arm Solutions, or the Cyber Pro podcast.
Awesome. Rick, I really appreciate you being on the show. It's been an episode of MSP-37. Thanks and have a great week.